I'm Katie Couric. Tonight, emotions run high at Walter Reed as wounded soldiers and their families tell horror stories of treatment and mistreatment.
Having to live through the mess that we lived through at Walter Reed has been worse than anything I've ever sacrificed in my life.
But do the problems at veterans' hospitals go far beyond Walter Reed? Also tonight, a new health scare for Vice President Cheney. A blood clot in his leg. We'll have the latest. The surprising findings of a study on childhood obesity. It may be causing girls to reach puberty much earlier. And synchronize your watches. But are we headed for a high-tech meltdown as daylight saving time comes early this year?
This is the CBS Evening News with Katie Couric.
Hello, everyone. The national outrage over the treatment of America's war wounded brought members of Congress to Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington today, and they got an earful, hearing firsthand accounts from soldiers who were treated there and their families. Here's David Martin.
The bullet that cost Sergeant Dan Shannon his left eye still leaves him groping for words. But when a House committee investigating conditions at Walter Reed Army Medical Center asked him the key question of the day, he let it rip.
My biggest concern?
Yes, sir.
My biggest concern is having the young men and women that have had their lives shattered in service to their country get taken care of.
The most riveting testimony came from the wife of a National Guard soldier injured in Iraq.
My life was ripped apart the day that my husband was injured. But then having to live through the mess that we lived through at Walter Reed has been worse than anything I've ever sacrificed in my life.
Annette McLeod told of battling a system that wanted to blame her husband's mental problems not on his head injury, but on a pre-existing condition.
He was considered fit enough to serve in the National Guard for 16 years. He was fit enough for deployment, but now they're saying his mental problems he had before he went to Iraq.
And she captured exactly why shoddy conditions at Walter Reed have touched such a public nerve.
This is how we treat our soldiers. We give them nothing. But they're good enough to go and sacrifice their life, and we give them nothing.
Major General George Waitman, who last week was fired as the commander of Walter Reed, had this to say to his former patients and specifically to Annette McLeod.
I'd just like to apologize for not meeting their expectations, not only in the care provided, but also in having so many bureaucratic processes. It just took your fortitude to be an advocate for your husband.
But perhaps the most troubling question remains. If this could happen at Walter Reed, the crown jewel of military hospitals, what about all the other facilities where wounded soldiers are treated?
These problems go well beyond the walls of Walter Reed, and that there are problems systemic throughout the military healthcare system. And as we send more and more troops into Iraq and Afghanistan, these problems are only going to get worse, not better.
Some of the red tape seems mindless. A soldier medevaced from Iraq with a leg blown off has to fill out 22 separate forms, including one certifying he was wounded in the line of duty. And there are bound to be more revelations as congressional hearings continue through most of this week, Katie.
David Martin at the Pentagon tonight. So how will these problems be fixed? President Bush is appointing a bipartisan commission, and in an address to a veterans group today, Vice President Cheney promised quick action.
There will be no excuses, only action. And the federal bureaucracy will not slow that action down. We're going to fix the problems at Walter Reed, period.
Right after the vice president made those remarks, he needed medical treatment and was taken to his doctor's office. It turns out he has a blood clot in his left leg. Jim Axelrod is at the White House tonight. Jim, the vice president is 66. He has a history of heart problems. What is the White House saying about the seriousness of this medical issue?
Well, the vice president's spokeswoman first called it a minor issue, saying he had some pain in his leg, got it checked out, then went back to work. But then a written statement came out calling it a deep vein thrombosis. Now that's a condition that can kill.
A DVT, as it's called, is a blood clot that develops in a vein, in Mr. Cheney's case, in the leg. This did not happen with him, but the clot can break off, travel through the bloodstream, and lodge in the lungs. The vice president has just returned from a 10-day, 25,000-mile trip around the world.
And since deep vein thrombosis can be caused by prolonged immobility, like a lot of time in an airplane, Mr. Cheney then went to his doctor, who then found the clot. Katie.
All right, Jim, thanks very much. Dr. John LaPook is our CBS News medical correspondent. John, does the vice president's previous history of heart disease make him more prone to this current condition?
Well, we know that back in 2005, Mr. Cheney had surgery on the blood vessels in his legs, and perhaps that played a role in increasing his risk. On the other hand, he developed this complication, just like many people do who have no known medical problems, after a long plane flight.
All right.
So, you know, I think he's going to do very well. Mortality for this is less than 5%. If it's treated early and treated correctly, he should do well. But I think the doctors are going to want to take a close look at him and follow him closely because of his underlying medical condition.
But having said that, it doesn't appear to be too serious from a medical point of view.
He should do very, very well if treated early and treated correctly, as obviously is happening.
I'm sure he'll have good, excellent medical care.
Knows somebody.
All right, thanks, John. And now to Iraq, where insurgents continue to attack Baghdad markets. Today, a suicide car bomb went off in an area of the city known for its bookstores. At least 20 Iraqis were killed in the explosion, which left bloody paper scattered everywhere. Meanwhile, the security crackdown in Baghdad is now entering a new phase. U.S. and Iraqi forces have been moving into the section known as Sadr City, home to 2 million people and controlled by a radical Shiite militia. Alan Pizzi is there.
Less than 5 miles from today's carnage, the latest front in the citywide security crackdown labeled Operation Imposing Law was opening up in the notorious Sadr City. It's an entirely new approach to security in the 6 square miles that are home to 2 million Shiite Muslims.
Are you guys working around this area?
Iraqi troops outnumbered Americans by 2 to 1, the exact opposite of previous operations. Meticulously planned in meetings that included local civic officials, the push into Sadr City is the trickiest part of Operation Imposing Law, the pivotal point in which the effort will stand or fail. The negotiations gave what U.S. troops termed the bad guys time to hide their weapons and disappear, which was just fine with American officers.
Whether the enemy are here or not, it doesn't really matter because the primary focus is on the local populace, developing relationships with them and increasing security.
The last time the Americans rolled into Sadr City in force, they were ambushed by the army of radical Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr. Residents looked to Sadr's men for protection from attacks from Sunni Muslim insurgents. Reinforced local police stations are the latest tactic to reverse that. And in a new development, they will be manned 24 hours a day by Iraqi and American forces. But those who live and play nearby have not yet embraced the new order. We don't like this, soccer coach Farhan Faraj says. If there is any attack against the base, we will also be hit. The American commander warns changing such attitudes will be a slow process.
You got to be patient. You have to view things through an Iraqi lens and manage your expectations.
Just getting to the point where the Iraqi and American forces are seen as protectors rather than the enemy would be significant progress. Alan Pizzi, CBS News, Baghdad.
Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, for the second day in a row, civilians were caught in the crossfire as NATO forces targeted militants. A NATO airstrike north of Kabul last night killed 9 people, including 4 young children. The bombs destroyed their family's mud brick home. The U.S. military says the strike was meant to target insurgents who had attacked an American airbase. Now turning to presidential politics, the debate today among Democrats is who won the first serious showdown involving the frontrunners, Senators Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. They appeared yesterday at ceremonies in Selma, Alabama, commemorating a 1965 civil rights march when white police officers beat mostly black marchers. And for the first time, the Clinton campaign employed its not-so-secret weapon. Here's our national political correspondent, Gloria Borger.
The decision to send Bill Clinton to march in Selma alongside his wife was made at the last minute, and it was a delicate mission to prop up Hillary Clinton's standing with African Americans while not overshadowing her. So while his wife preached at a Selma church, Bill Clinton was not sitting in the congregation.
All the good speaking has been done by Hillary and Senator Obama today already. I just sort of bring it up the rear.
It's a lesson the Clinton campaign learned after the president upstaged his wife at the funeral for Coretta Scott King. Finding a way to turn a former president into a good campaign spouse is tough. It's never happened before. And it inevitably leads to this question. Aside from raising money and acting as strategist-in-chief, what is the best way for her to use him?
Something like this is like a potent medicine. You can use it, but you have to use it sparingly and in small doses.
Even small doses sometimes yield surprises, as on Sunday when Mr. Clinton embraced his wife's opponent and still got a huge cheer. As President Clinton was leaving office, his popularity among African Americans was at 73%. Congressman John Lewis calls him an icon.
In the African American community, there's probably no other white politician has such a hold on that community.
The Clinton campaign wants to transfer some of that love to Hillary.
I'm not sure that it's possible to transfer it and do it just right, but I think it's not a bad problem to have that you're married to the most popular Democrat in the United States.
Before Barack Obama entered the Democratic race, there was a sense of inevitability about Hillary Clinton's nomination. But now there's a real political fight. And on lots of levels, the big question is this: will Bill Clinton help her or hurt? Katie.
Gloria Borger in Washington tonight. Gloria, thank you. In Enterprise, Alabama today, funerals were held for 3 of the 8 high school students killed by last week's tornado. At the service for 16-year-old Michelle Wilson, the minister told mourners there's no easy explanation for her death or the deaths of her classmates. The twister destroyed Enterprise High School. Classes are expected to resume next week in a number of other buildings in the district. We have much more CBS News ahead. Coming up next, the American Spirit, the volunteers who went to Enterprise, Alabama to help absolute strangers. And later, daylight saving time is coming early this year. Will it mean a computer meltdown? CBS News in Focus. Responding to disaster, the federal government can do it. FEMA has some $3.4 billion tax dollars a year to spend. And since its disastrous performance after Hurricane Katrina, FEMA has promised to move faster. But sometimes the people who show up first after a disaster are volunteers. As national correspondent Byron Pitts reports, volunteers with the American spirit.
Thank you, kids.
Like so many tornado survivors, 64-year-old Marilyn Fisher of Lake Mack, Florida, is rebuilding her life one piece at a time.
I wish I had arms long enough to reach around all of you.
Marilyn's surrounded by volunteers from around the country, all part of a Christian nonprofit organization called ACTS, Active Community Team Services.
We have some great 18-year-olds.
David Canther, a preacher who left the pulpit, founded ACTS 3 years ago.
I love to rally business people, volunteers from all over, college students, high school students, to be on site after disaster happens within 24 hours, feeding people.
Canther calls this effort an army of everyone. Go teams bring food, water, supplies, and medical services straight into disaster zones. When Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast, ACTS hit the ground.
There are trees all over the main highways, and we're cutting our way in, man. We're determined.
You cut your way into Louisiana.
Cut our way in there. And so it was all through the night. It took us 5 hours to go 5 miles about.
5 hours turned into 9 months. In that time, ACTS distributed more than $23 million in donated goods and served nearly 500,000 hot meals.
This trailer here is designed to be in the field. It'll cook 200 pizzas an hour.
Oh my goodness. ACTS has never received a dime from the federal or any state government. Everything comes from private donations. The goal, feed both the body and the soul.
The sound stages will be used constantly for emotional therapy.
Emotional therapy?
Emotional therapy.
You do more than just feed people.
They need emotional healing. They have no theaters open, they have no power, they have no TVs, radios for weeks. They need more than that food and water to begin with.
Food and fellowship. There are 12,000 volunteers nationwide, including students from Christian colleges and high schools who are given time off from class when disasters strike.
How do I phrase this question in a sensitive way? Are you guys just weird? High school kids who want to sacrifice their time?
When I know I have the ability to help somebody in need, it makes me feel good to know that they've been helped, and that I made a difference.
They've made a difference in Marilyn Fisher's life. A broken hand, fractured collarbone from the tornado that destroyed her home a month ago. Her husband's still in the hospital, and she's still waiting on FEMA.
They're slower than Moses.
Forgive me, but why are you even necessary? We pay taxes. We have organizations like FEMA.
There's a huge gap or a hole. Faith-based groups and others fill a tremendous need, and that is we mobilize quickly. We don't have to be paid. We love doing efficiently.
What do you say to these kids when they come out and they're sweeping up and picking up?
I hug them and I tell them thanks and I appreciate what they're doing. And I just about cry on their shoulder because they've been so good to us.
We love you, Marilyn.
Well, I love all of you.
It's hard not to. Byron Pitts, CBS News, Lake Mack, Florida.
And as we mentioned a bit earlier in the broadcast, the first volunteers to go to Enterprise, Alabama after the tornado last week were from that very group, ACTS. By the way, tomorrow we're launching a new series on global warming and what people are doing about it. We're going to share some new ideas on building green homes, exporting clean energy, and cutting air pollution in global warming cool solutions. Coming up next, the surprising results of a new study. Childhood obesity in girls could have an unexpected consequence. We're learning tonight that it could be dangerous to consider excess weight on little girls just baby fat. Nearly 15% of young girls are overweight. That's more than quadruple the number 25 years ago. And a new report suggests obesity can trick a girl's body into maturing too quickly. Here again is Dr. John LaPook.
Here's a piece.
Vicki Myers is concerned her 4-year-old Patricia might grow up too fast.
It's hard enough for a 12-year-old to go through it, let alone an 8-year-old. I want her to be a happy, healthy kid.
She has reason to worry. A new study shows obesity in preschoolers can lead to early puberty.
What this new study tells us is that parents have to be concerned about obesity even when their children are only 2 and 3 years old. I think that's the shock.
The study followed 354 girls over a decade. Researchers found at age 9, 80% of the obese girls were entering puberty. In contrast, only 58% of overweight girls and 40% of normal weight girls were entering puberty at that age.
Our study suggests that there's a link between body fat and earlier onset of puberty, but unfortunately we don't understand the mechanism by which this happens.
But experts do understand it can lead to problems.
Girls who develop earlier are more likely to abuse alcohol and drugs, are more likely to be depressed and moody and have problems in school.
Psychologist Diana Zuckerman is alarmed by this trend.
We live in a culture where there's a lot of pressure on little girls to grow up too fast. Parents really have to talk to their children, talk to their daughters, talk to their sons as well, so that these girls can know how to cope with those raging hormones that are causing this early development.
This study is yet more evidence that weight matters, even for toddlers. Dr. John LaPook, CBS News, New York.
Coming up next, an early start to daylight saving time. Will your computer be ready? A lot of people may be asking what time it is this coming weekend when a new law kicks in, moving the start of daylight saving time from the first Sunday in April to the second Sunday in March. We may cope with the change, but will our computers? Here's our science and technology correspondent, Daniel Seberg.
In today's TikTok world, being off by just a few minutes can mean missing an important meeting or watching the train leave without you. But what if whatever you tell time with was off by a whole hour? That's what some people are worrying will happen Sunday morning.
Well, it's an annoyance and it's inconvenience.
Georgia Tech professor Jonathan Giffen says in our computer-dominated society, there are plenty of places this could strike if systems are not properly reprogrammed in time. Everything from hotel wake-up calls to cell phone billing.
Now we have systems that automatically update clocks for you. And if those systems are not properly patched, they will update the time incorrectly.
How did we get here? Well, Congress changed the way daylight saving time works with a little provision as part of a massive energy bill back in 2005. The idea being that more daylight in the evening would mean less use of electricity. But some experts are skeptical it'll have much of an effect, and it could cause problems for consumers. How many products in this store have a clock in them?
Wow, that's a lot of pieces.
Circuit City's Todd Cooper says some of them can be changed manually, but you'll need a little technological know-how to adjust the clock on the more sophisticated stuff. How big of a problem is this?
For your personal PC users, it can be a major issue if they're using some really time-sensitive programs that they need to update.
Cable companies should be on top of the situation.
So if my favorite show's on at a certain time and I want to make sure I record it, is that going to work out?
Yes, no problem
whatsoever.
Nothing different on that whatsoever.
For those who are worried about this new headache, there's at least one thing that's easy to start with.
What you need to do to adjust your manual clocks is turn your dials.
Daniel Seberg, CBS News, Atlanta.
That's got to be easier.
And under the new law, the end of daylight saving time moves from the last Sunday in October to the first Sunday in November. That's all the time we have tonight. I'm Katie Couric. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.